process of embalming, and do some religions not want embalming, or is it required by some type of law?
Okay, the process, that's a big question. The process of embalming is the use of chemicals to temporarily prohibit the decomposition of human remains. That's the scientific definition. Okay? Now, that's one part. Now, the process of embalming, you want to know like the physics, like where we do it and all that kind of thing? Or you?
How you do it.
Okay, so how we do it, we get the individual in that is passed away.
Yeah.
We get them up on the morgue table. We give them a bath first and foremost. We clean them up. And that's not because of the myths you hear out in the streets where people, mess themselves and stuff. That's more of a respect thing. A lot of times there before death, people will not have had a proper bath, sometimes days, even weeks, before death. And it's also, it's a very therapeutic type thing in honoring the deceased. And it also relaxes all of their features so that you can get a more pleasant end result. So then we make a small incision here in the neck, and we go into the carotid artery, and we pull the blood out of the jugular vein, and we inject the formaldehyde through there. And what that basically does is, like I said, it temporarily makes the tissues, if you will, muscles, fat, protein, it makes it a different pH level. So right now, you and I are at a 7.8, 7.9 pH, okay? And the bacteria that live in our bodies, in our intestines, thrive at that pH. So what happens is at the time of death, the walls of our intestines immediately begin to break down because they're very thin. So that bacteria will spread fairly fast out of the intestines. Well, then you've already got bacteria inside of you that start to decompose you at that pH level. So when we do the formaldehyde, the injection, we're actually changing your pH from a 7.7, 7.8 down to a 6, which is like an alkaline, and therefore bacteria can't consume you. You're no longer a food source for bacteria. That's why it delays the decomposition process. Now, the second part of that was different religions. The only religion there was a lot more Orthodox churches, like you had Catholic Orthodox, you had a lot of these Orthodox churches that had strict regulations on how to handle their deceased. So much so, over the past 25, 30 years, all of your big organizations, religious organizations, have kind of backed off of all of the strict guidelines, because each family has the ability to honor their loved one the way that they want to and still be a part of their religious organization. So the only one that I know of right now, well, two, the Jewish people, they want to be buried within 72 hours, generally no embalming, and no public visitation, of course, because with no embalming you can't have a deceased body laid out for the public because it's a health hazard. And then the Muslims are very similar to that. They want to be buried, they've got some crazy, they want to be buried within 24 hours, but a lot of times that doesn't happen because it's not, you can't get everything done logistic-wise in 24 hours.
Okay. Have you had to deal with any unusual requests from families or any other religions in your field?
Absolutely. Generally here in rural USA, there's a broad spectrum with families and what they choose. We've had a few instances where I have buried a Jewish person and they wanted to be, like they died at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm standing there and they're like, well, we want to bury her at 6. And I'm like, people, that's 2 hours. There's no way I can dig a grave that quick. But I have had it done by the following morning. So we have buried a Jewish person, several. I've flown, when they were building a new high school out here, there was a Mexican that was working on and when I say this, I'm just telling you their nationality. I'm not like referring to them derogatory, but there was a Mexican national that was pouring block out here.
Yeah.
And this is something pretty interesting to put in your paperwork. So the gentleman passed away out here, and his family came up from North Carolina. We picked him up, and they wanted him flown back to Gutierrez, Mexico. Okay? Well, we'd never done an international ship out. We had received people back here that had gone abroad and passed away, but we had never shipped one internationally. So I immediately got on the phone to the United States Embassy up in Washington and begun the process. And they told me at that time, they said, if you're good at your job, you will have that guy on a plane in 25 days. Okay? I focused on nothing but him, period, as far as getting this. What you had to do is you had to get all the documents, the United States documents. You had to submit them to the United States Embassy. They had to send them to the Mexican consulate, get them translated into Mexican documents, go back to the U.S. Embassy, and then back to us, and then we could get him on the plane. And I got him on the plane in 11 days. And I actually got recognized by the Virginia Board of Funeral Directors and Embalmers for the efficiency, and they wanted me to do it for other funeral homes, and I said, no, it's not something I'm interested in. So that, and then mainly just Christian here. And then we've had a few, and when I say few, like one that I did not comply with. I mean, they wanted to do some really sketchy stuff, and I said, y'all can do whatever you want at that gravesite, but you're not doing it here in this funeral home. And that was one that we brought in from Florida, and he was part of some motorcycle Cuban mafia type, and they wanted to bite a head off a crow. And, yeah. So I didn't allow any of that to happen in our facility, but I was a part of it.
Okay. Seeing all this as you work, does it affect the way you view death?
It does. I am acutely aware of how fragile life is. Before going into this profession, I was like the rest of the United States citizens. As a young age, we all kind of feel like we're invincible, death's not going to happen to us, we kind of just go on and think we're all going to live to be 70 and 80. But being in this industry, I realize that life can be taken from you like that. And none of us are guaranteed tomorrow. And we do not have to get old and lay sick to pass away. So, to answer that, probably the most beneficial thing that I've taken from this profession is the acute awareness of my own religion, making sure that I'm prepared to meet my Maker, because I know that it can happen at any
time. I think you might have answered this already. How many different cultures has this funeral parlor presided over?
I would probably say just about everyone that there is, but they're all one at a time, one here, one there. For the most part, it's all Judeo-Christian based services.
Okay. In the Christian culture, what is mostly favored to happen during the funeral or burial? And has there been an increase in people wanting cremation this year?
There has been an increase in cremation. Cremation is it's a 3-part process. Yeah. And what I mean by that is the reason that cremation has increased is 3 reasons. A lot of the life insurance companies that used to really hit this area hard and promote life insurance, they've all been sold out to these big conglomerates up north, and they've just nobody really pushes life insurance in the area. So you have a lot of people who are passing away now and they're unprepared, so they're choosing cremation for financial reasons. Okay, and then the second part of cremation is a lot of times people, same aspect, they won't have a grave space. They may have a life insurance policy, but they don't have a grave space. And so it just makes it really intense at the time of death to try to get all these things in a row. So people just go for the easier option. Cremation, it is a thing of the future as far as United States, statistically speaking, I think 10 years ago, the United States as a whole was at 20% cremation rate. Now you're going to have your pockets like California, Alaska, different areas that are, 80, 90%. And then you're going to have places that are less than 10%. But now as a nation, we're at about 45% cremation rate.
Now, in the Christian culture, what is usually happen at a funeral or burial?
In the Christian culture, generally what will happen is you will have a visitation and a funeral. And during the funeral, the preacher will get up and preach out of the Bible and tell the family, the words of comfort that the Bible tells us to give to one another, comfort one another with these words. Then there'll be a graveside service. And that's generally everything that we do as far as Christian-wise.
Okay. That's really all I got.
Is that all you got?
Yeah.
Do you have any other questions that you'd like to add to your paper or anything?
Not off the top of my head. I was sitting there trying to come up with some good ideas to ask.
Well, let me give you something that'll probably be on the cusp. I don't know if everybody has this same assignment, but this will be something that you went a bit above and beyond, and you can inform your classmates about it. There's a new process coming out. It's called alkaline hydrolysis.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and it is a process where you end up with the same result as cremation, but it is done by water instead of fire, and it is just now been passed in Colorado and Oregon, and so we're looking for the other 48 states. Eventually they'll pick it up, and you can tell them about it. What it is it's a process where you put water in a tank and then a small electrical charge. I think it's 24 volts, and they warm the water temperature up to 180 degrees, and the remains stay inside of this tank, which is basically looks like to me a big propane tank with a seal on the end of it, and you just slide them down in it and it fills up. And at the end of the process, you end up with just skeletal remains in there. Everything's liquefied. And then you pull those out and you process them the same way as you do with cremation. So that's something you could share with you.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, you could share that with you. It will, by the time, if you and I live a natural life, it'll be a lot more mainstream by the time that we,
Probably.
you know what I mean? Because it's a lot softer on families to, think about that process versus, burning your loved one.
Yeah.
Which to each his own. My philosophy has always been, if the flames are going to get me, they're going to have to come to my box. You know what I mean? So.
That other one we were talking about the other day, the green burial, when Buddy was here.
Yeah, and there's a new wave of green burials where people are taking like an empty lot and they're turning them into cemeteries. And what they're doing is they're using bamboo and solid wood, almost like the Jewish casket type thing, where they're just complete natural elements. You don't embalm the body, you just place the body in there, bury it, and then plant a tree in the spot.
I think I've read something about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's becoming a lot more. And I'll tell you some other things. The whole reason that embalming came along. Okay, World War not World War I, the Civil War. Okay, the guys that were fighting for the North, if they're way down in Alabama having a fight, and they get killed in war, well, they had to ride horse carriages up to Pennsylvania, wherever their family was. Well, by the time they got home, of course, it was an advanced state of decay. So Dr. Thomas Hunter was the man that came up with embalming, and it was created during the Civil War so that they could preserve bodies long enough to get them back home to their loved ones to be able to say goodbye. And that's how it got started. Now the Egyptians did it back 3,000 years ago, of course, but it's different. And I've actually learned how to make a mummy. I can make a mummy. Not a lot of people can do that, but we did it in college. So we actually made a mummy, and that's a pretty unique process too.
I appreciate you for your time, man.
Absolutely. It's an honor to meet you.